The DCU is here in full swing with Creature Commandos, Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2 rounding out the first year of DCU content. So I thought it'd be fun to see how this first year of DCU compares to the DCEU. Hi, my name's Zack, and today we are putting both the DCEU and DCU projects on a tier list. And we're starting with the first in the DCEU with Man of Steel. And of course, when Man of Steel came out, it was a very controversial film amongst not just comic book fans, but especially Superman fans, where this was a very different take on the character portrayed by Henry Cavill. And I also like that this does approach it more in a real world situation where Superman fighting Zod would cause a bunch of destruction, people would lose lives, and I like that this film doesn't shy away from showing that with arguably some of the best Superman action that we've ever gotten in a Superman film. I'm actually going to put Man of Steel in the A category. I think that this is a pretty solid start to the DCEU. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to this movie with the Superman character, really kind of deconstructing him a little bit, going down to the roots of who he is, and really challenging him on that throughout the entirety of this movie. I do think that the end of this film with Superman having to kill Zod has always made a ton of sense to me. I like that Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder and David S. Gordon, they didn't shy away, they didn't backtrack from putting Superman in this hard place and a rock situation, and they follow through on Superman having to make the hard choice and the consequences that come from that decision. So I'm pretty high on Man of Steel, and it's only gotten better for me with age. There's definitely some things that don't work for me. Amy Adams and Henry Cavill, I feel like, have no chemistry as Lois Lane and Clark Kent, but beyond all that, I think this is a pretty solid start, so I'm putting it up there in the A's. Next, we move on to Batman vs. Superman, which was probably one of the most hyped up films that I've ever seen in my lifetime when this was coming out back in 2016. Superman, Batman, first time they were ever live action on the screen together. And I do think that Batman vs. Superman has some things going for it. I think it throws out some pretty interesting ideas and gives us a great Batman in Ben Affleck. Up until this point, I think Ben Affleck was my favorite Batman. But when it comes to the contrived conflict that they put on Superman and Batman in this film, I do feel like it's pretty weak in the storytelling, where they both kind of come across as hypocrites, where Superman wants to take down Batman because Batman is branding criminals, and Batman wants to take down Superman because Superman is killing criminals. And at the same time, they're both kind of doing things that the other one does, so it doesn't really work for me on a conflict level. Batman has a stronger stance than Superman does, in my opinion, where Batman feels like if there's even a 1% chance that Superman could turn bad, he must be stopped. I think that's a pretty compelling motive for Batman to have against Superman in this film, but the whole story is just kind of a convoluted, overly done mess, where you've got Lex Luthor also thrown into the mix as the puppet master behind the scenes for Batman and Superman to fight, but you really don't miss much. If you take Lex out of the film, it doesn't really play all that well into the overall story. It's also just a very bloated film where it's trying to set up the Justice League through emails and video footage from security footage. And the introduction to Wonder Woman, while awesome, does feel very shoehorned in to the film, and so because of that, I can't go any higher than a B. There's just a lot in the writing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And speaking of not making a whole lot of sense, we then move on to Suicide Squad, the 2016 rendition of this property, and I'm gonna put Suicide Squad in the D category. When this first came out, when I first watched this with my group of friends, we were eating it up. We were really enjoying it. Will Smith was charismatic. Margot Robbie was so funny. There was some fun action throughout it. But when I kept coming back to this film, even all of those entertainment aspects that are within it, the story here is a complete mess. Not just the story, but the editing in this film is a complete mess. It is famously known that this film went through a whole bunch of editing redoings, where when Deadpool came out, they wanted it to be more like Deadpool, and then Guardians of the Galaxy, they wanted to have the musical element. It's like a music video that plays over all of these transitional scenes where characters end up places with no reason or context to it. On top of that, the villains that they're fighting in this doesn't make any sense why this particular group of Suicide Squad members would be going after these villains. The Enchantress and what she's doing doesn't make any sense at all for her motivation or goal at the end of the film. While you've got some charismatic characters in here played by charismatic actors, I don't particularly hate Jared Leto's Joker. I like that he was trying to do something so drastically different from Heath Ledger, but he does feel like an afterthought in the film. You can definitely tell that a lot of the stuff with Jared Leto's Joker was cut from the film. It plays that way in the final product. So Suicide Squad as a film is just a complete and utter disaster. But I will admit I can have some fun with it in a so bad it's good kind of way. And it's fun to see the cameos of Batman and stuff popping up in here as well. But just when it seemed like the DCEU ship was starting to go down, Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot came out with Wonder Woman and kind of saved the whole thing. I really enjoy Wonder Woman. I think that Wonder Woman does a great job of building out the world of Themyscira and introducing us to the Amazons within the DCEU. Gal Gadot does a really great job of making Wonder Woman a very endearing character, and the addition of Chris Pine being in here and kind of doing the heavy lifting of Gal Gadot's performance is a big benefit, but also making this a fish out of water story, a pretty classic story with Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman coming into the world of World War I. And the way that they play with that and her character and her innocence to the world, I think really does do a lot to benefit not just the movie itself, but the character of Wonder Woman within the DCEU at this time. There's some really great action sequences with Wonder Woman and the No Man's Land, particularly being almost a classic one at this point. I do think the film kind of falls apart a little bit by the third act, but I'm still going to put Wonder Woman in the A category. I think that this is a very solid film. It was a huge win for the DCEU back in 2017, coming off of Suicide Squad and even Batman vs. Superman, and it showed that the future of this universe was a bit brighter than fans were feeling with the 3 past entries that came before it. But that didn't last long, as just a couple months later we got Justice League, and I'm not going to bury the lead here. Justice League is going down in the D category, and I did actually enjoy this movie more when I first saw it in theaters. Of course, this has the infamous behind the scenes story of Zack Snyder having to step away from this project due to a tragedy in his family, and the studio kind of using that in a very disgusting way to move on from Zack Snyder. They brought Joss Whedon in to basically reshoot and rewrite a bunch of Zack Snyder's work for the film and kind of duct tape this whole film together, make it only a mandatory 2-hour running time where you still have to introduce Aquaman, the Flash, and Cyborg into the Justice League. It creates a very rushed feeling while watching this film. Everything feels very cookie cutter and dumbed down for the audience and for the story. There are still some fun character interactions in here that I even will admit I miss from being in Zack Snyder's Justice League, like Batman giving Flash the motivation to go save people. I really did enjoy that scene when I first saw it in theaters, and whenever I do go back to watch this film, which after Zack Snyder's Justice League is a very small amount that I go back to watch this film, I enjoy seeing those kind of moments pop back up. But this movie is also very oversaturated with the colors. They tried to go for the opposite side of the pendulum with Zack Snyder's style, which is more muted colors, and Joss Whedon wanted to really bring everything to light in this, and it makes some of the costumes that were never supposed to be seen in this lighting and in this way look very goofy and silly on some of these actors. I do think a lot of the performances as well, you can kind of tell when actors are phoning it in. assumingly for the reshoots that they had to do with Joss Whedon. So this film in and of itself is just not very well put together, but after you see the context of what was Zack Snyder's Justice League, this whole thing just completely falls apart in my eyes. So it's going way down there. I think it might even be worse than Suicide Squad. I'll put it above Suicide Squad for now. But yeah, Justice League, it just did not age. It aged like milk. It aged poorly. But one that did not age too poorly is Aquaman, which was undoubtedly the biggest success that the DCU had up until that point, where this is the only DCEU movie that ever crossed that $1 billion mark, which a lot of people back in the time when Aquaman was coming out had no faith that the movie could actually do that. And when I saw this in theaters for the first time, I wasn't so thrilled by it. I wasn't so hyped up on Aquaman. This has aged a bit better for me in the years since, where I do allow myself to just kind of have fun with the whole silly, wacky, corny concept of Aquaman in this film. I think there's some really fun action sequences that James Wan pulls off. I think that the underwater sequences actually don't look too bad even to this day. They do craft a pretty interesting world of Atlantis in this film. There are a lot of weak spots for me, though, where I think that this being a blatant just setup for Black Manta to be the villain in the next film is a little bit of a cheap out. I don't think that Amber Heard and Jason Momoa have very good chemistry throughout the movie, and this globe-trotting adventure does kind of rely on their relationship, which is a big hurt of the film. But I think Patrick Wilson as the villain here does elevate the film a bit more. There's a fun kind of brotherly conflict and tragedy that kind of goes on between Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson's characters in Aquaman. So while I don't think that Aquaman is great, I do enjoy it more than I initially did, and I have more fun with it than I initially did. I'm going to put it in the C category. I think it's a fine film, but it's not good enough to be up there in the A or the B, or especially the S for me. But one that could get up there is our next, which is Shazam. And Shazam for me is probably one of the most well-rounded films in the entire DCEU, where I feel like the concept of big in a superhero movie is just such a great way to do this story. Zachary Levi in this film, where he has to play a young kid as a superhero, he absolutely nails the enthusiasm, the energy, and the thrill that would come with being a kid as a superhero. And there's a fun dynamic between him and Freddy in this film, where you just totally buy into the fact that Zachary Levi is this kid who has now gotten these amazing superpowers, and they have a ton of fun exploring and playing with that. I also think that the villain in here is also pretty threatening and is a good counterpoint to Shazam. It also does lead to the film having a couple of tonal inconsistencies for me and issues where some of the stuff with the villain just gets so dark and a little bit of a different flavor than the film with Shazam and the kids have, but they have a great emotional core and family story that goes in a found family story that goes on with Billy and Shazam that just really endears me and just really puts a smile on my face when I watch Shazam. So I don't think I can get Shazam up into that S tier, but I'm definitely going to put it up there in the A tier. I think it is possibly one of the best, if not the best, the DCEU ever offered. And then we come to the first of our COVID era of films with Birds of Prey and the Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, but we all just call this Birds of Prey. And Birds of Prey is kind of like a cheap attempt at making a Guy Ritchie type film, and for the most part I do think that that works pretty well for this movie, where it is just this crazy kind of low stakes story of a girl that has a MacGuffin that the villain wants, and Harley Quinn is trying to keep her safe, and she gets this band of characters together that originally want to kill her, but now they all have to work together, and you've got Harley Quinn at the center of it, where Margot Robbie is just always so entertaining and fun as this character. I also enjoy the inclusion of Ewan McGregor in here. as the villain, and I think they give him some really dark moments to play with. I do feel like the film is kind of uneven, though, at times. I do feel like the film is a bit all over the place, but the way that it's constructed and the way that it's executed is kind of supposed to feel that way, where Harley Quinn is the untrustworthy narrator of the entire film. So the whole way that it kind of thrashes you around does have that sense that you're being kind of told this story from the mind of someone who is absolutely crazy. So the way that the film works in that way, I do think is a benefit to it, even if it does, while you're watching it, just kind of give you this sense of an unbalanced experience. I do enjoy this. I do think that the positives outweigh the negatives for me personally. I'm going to put Birds of Prey and One Emancipation of One Harley Quinn in the B category, but one that was not enjoyable for me is Wonder Woman 1984, which I'm not going to bury the lead. It's going at the D category. In fact, it's probably going at the very tail end of the D category. With Patty Jenkins and the entire cast coming back for this one, it's even more of a disheartening disappointment to see what they put out, where they kind of do a throwback to the 90s superhero films, in the sense that this is when they didn't really know what to do with comic book movies, and they follow a lot of the same tropes and bad ideas that those movies did. I mean, Cheetah in here by Kristen Wiig is pretty much just characters like the Riddler, who those kind of character types should have stayed in the 90s. They didn't work then, they don't work now, and the whole movie just has this more corny, outlandish kind of feel to it than the original Wonder Woman did, where that felt grounded while also having the comic book flair on top of it. Nothing here feels grounded. Everything just kind of feels over the top and insane, and you can't really take any of it seriously. Pedro Pascal's villain in here, all he has is a wishing rock that he uses to make the world the way that he wants it to be and to benefit himself. It's not a very compelling external threat for Wonder Woman. Even the journey of Wonder Woman and the whole way they bring Chris Pine back, where he's back but he's in someone else's body, and everyone else can see that this isn't Chris Pine, but Wonder Woman sees him as Chris Pine, so we do. It's just a really bizarre and just stupid way to continue the character, who honestly shouldn't have even come back to begin with. I haven't really watched it since it came out. I think I saw it one other time after I initially watched it, which when it did come out, it was smack dab in that COVID time, so just having like a new comic book film was fun to watch. But after getting past that initial reaction to it, when you look at the overall story and narrative and ideas as a whole, they just do not come together to work at all. And I think there's also some bad performances in here that really just tank the entire thing. But now we get to the peak of the DCEU with Zack Snyder's Justice League. And I do mean the peak, because I am definitely putting this in the S tier. Zack Snyder getting to come back and not only put his version of the film out, but actually get to complete his movie, because this was not a completed film before HBO Max decided to put more money. I think they put like $6 million back into this to let Zack Snyder complete his vision of what this movie was supposed to be. Not only that, but they allowed him to make it like 4 hours long. And what Zack Snyder was able to do with this film is not only give us his full vision and kind of where he saw the DCEU going at that point, and kind of give us completions to storylines and story arcs that were set up but never really followed through on before this film came out, but he also got to deliver his superhero epic, where this does feel like it has the scope and scale that the Justice League deserves to have. He also fixed a lot of issues with the theatrical cut of the film, the first being Steppenwolf. Well, Steppenwolf in the theatrical cut was this cookie cutter, generic, stereotypical villain that had nothing to him and no one cared about. Steppenwolf here is intimidating. Steppenwolf here has motivation. He has a character that not only do you get a little bit of sympathetic feelings towards Steppenwolf and his mission of just wanting to appease Darkseid, but you do feel like he is a worthy threat to go against the Justice League, where you don't feel that in the theatrical cut. On top of that, the performances here throughout are just way better than in the theatrical cut. It seemed like the actors actually wanted to be here for this film. There are characters in here that you would have thought that they would have these kind of storylines going on when you watch the theatrical cut, where Cyborg here is almost like an essential core character to the story. He feels like he has the most character development and biggest character arc throughout the entire film, where in Justice League theatrical cut, he just kind of felt like he was a background character. It's crazy how different this film is to the theatrical cut in all of the best ways. The third act, not even the third act, but like the last hour and a half of this film with the Justice League taking down Steppenwolf's army is so much more exciting, is so much better shot. The action is 10 times better than what we got in the theatrical cut. This is what the DCEU aspired to be back in the day. And while this universe eventually fizzled out and fell apart, this gave us a glimpse at some of the excellence and epicness that we could have had in this universe had things gone a little bit differently. I'm so glad that Zack Snyder got to complete his vision of this film and put it out for us to see, because it is definitely one of the best things that the DCEU and DC in general on the big screen has ever given us, in my humble opinion. So it goes right up there at the peak of the S tier. And not far behind it is the Suicide Squad, James Gunn's first entry into the DC canon, and eventually what led to him taking over for the DCU after he was fired from Marvel for posting tweets back in the day that got resurfaced. Marvel let him go from Guardians, and DC swooped him up, asked him what he wanted to do, and he said he wanted to do the Suicide Squad. And when you watch the Suicide Squad, it's no question as to why James Gunn wanted to do the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad is the complete Gunn package, where you get his awesome group of misfit characters that he's so good at writing dialogue and banter and witty jokes for. You get the R-rated bloody violence that he brings from like his times doing trauma films and doing things like Slither and Super. He gets to go completely R-rated with this film, but yet he still includes heart and humor into the characters and the situations of them. He also brings back some of the best characters from the DC universe, such as Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn and Amanda Waller coming back in here as well. This is James Gunn bringing everything that James Gunn is good at doing and bringing us new stars as well, such as John Cena as Peacemaker, who is still playing the character to this day. Suicide Squad brings some of the best elements that he was able to bring in Guardians of the Galaxy, but completely unhinged, completely James Gunn, and completely awesome. So I am putting the Suicide Squad in the S tier. And then we get the Peacemaker Season 1, which I'm going to keep short and sweet because unpopular opinion, I'm not a huge fan of Peacemaker. I'm going to put Peacemaker Season 1 in the C category. There were definitely some things in this season that I did enjoy. Vigilante being a huge one. I thought that introduction to the character was so entertaining, and I really liked the role that he played. I liked the idea of Peacemaker being someone who's finding his found family, which is, again, something that Gunn is really good at, but something that Gunn also does that he sometimes leans too much into is his juvenile sense of humor, which his juvenile sense of humor doesn't always align with my sense of humor, especially when he goes so R-rated and so grotesque with it, that it does kind of water down some of these products of Gunn's DC universe films and TV shows for me. And Peacemaker is kind of the prime example of that for me, where I just don't jive with this show's sense of humor, with its tone. I have things that I like about it. I like some of the characters. I like some of the action. I like some of Gunn's heart and just character moments that he's able to give to misfit group of characters, and some of the humor does work for me, but this is also where Gunn goes a little bit too much with that raunchy, grotesque, in your face abrasive kind of humor that just ultimately doesn't work for me as something that I enjoy. So I didn't even watch all of Peacemaker season 1. I saw a couple episodes, and I think I saw the finale, so I kind of know how the story went. But this was just not a season for me. But I also didn't think that it was a terrible show. So C is where I'm going to put it. I think that's pretty generous, where it's not for me, but I don't think it's terrible. And then we've got Black Adam, which to me is probably the most superficially entertaining film in the entire DCEU, where this film doesn't really have any substance to its story. It's really just there for Dwayne Johnson to knock fools around and for great big action sequences with this character, which I have a lot of fun with. In a similar way to Aquaman, I don't get so deep into the characters, I don't get so deep into the story, but I just like sitting there and being entertained and having fun with the action sequences. So I am going to put this one in the C category as well. I'm going to put it at the front of the C category. I do think I have the most fun with this film out of Aquaman and Peacemaker season 1. I also really enjoy the Justice Gang in this film, and the incorporation of them coming in, and kind of the conflict that begins between Black Adam and Hawkman, where Hawkman is like, don't kill people, Black Adam, and Black Adam's like, watch me, Hawkman, I'm gonna kill people. And that's basically the whole conflict of the entire movie, is Black Adam wants to keep killing his villains and Hawkman wants him to stop doing that. It doesn't go much deeper than that, but it's also a ton of fun to watch Dwayne Johnson knock these fools around, and there are some really fun action sequences. I don't think it's a great movie, but it's a superficially entertaining one. But we're beginning to reach the end of the DCEU with Shazam: Fury of the Gods. And as someone who really enjoys the first Shazam, really loved seeing big done in the comic book way, even has it up in the A tier, Shazam: Fury of the Gods is going down in that D tier. In fact, it's only going to go in front of Wonder Woman 1984 for me. Shazam: Fury of the Gods just lost all of the magic and spark that I really enjoyed about the first Shazam. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is due to Zachary Levi's performance as Shazam here, where in the first film, Billy was so young that the heightened level of youth that Zachary Levi was playing Shazam at in the first film worked and jived with the character of Billy. Here, Billy is grown up. He's like 18. They're talking about him growing out of the foster care system. But Shazam, Zachary Levi, is still playing this as if he's 13 years old. So when you get Billy in his human form, and then you get Shazam, they do not feel like the same character, the same kid at all. On top of that, the villains here are incredibly weak. The family dynamic that I think worked very well in the first film does not work as strongly for me here in this second film. Some of the action sequences are kind of fun, but there's also some very poor elements of CGI thrown into the mix this time around. But I just think that the core character of Shazam here is thrown completely off with Zachary Levi's performance, which does not fit with the actor who plays Billy in this film. And it just kind of makes the whole thing fall apart for me. Did I chuckle a couple times? Sure. Do I have superficial fun with some of the action? I guess. But it also has one of the worst endings to any comic book film I've ever seen, where Shazam dies and then out of nowhere, just for cameo's sake, Wonder Woman appears at the end of the film, where there was no setup for her at all during the rest of the film, only to resurrect Shazam. It is a movie that completely falls on its face for me, and coming off of that first film, which I am such a high on, it's a massive disappointment to go from Shazam to Shazam: Fury of the Gods. All right, let's get controversial up in here, because we've reached The Flash, and The Flash for me is an A tier DCEU film. In fact, I'm gonna put it just slightly behind Shazam. I honestly love this movie, and I know a lot of people crap on this film because of its visual effects, because of the way that the CGI looks, and I get it. The CGI in this, I mean, I said it in my original review, it was dated by the time I left the theater. The CGI is not a standout of this film for me, but I think their take on the Flashpoint paradox story in the DCEU is actually a ton of fun. I loved seeing Michael Keaton come back here as Batman. I think the way that they worked him into the story actually added a lot to the story for me. I think that Ezra Miller here as Barry Allen / The Flash is actually a really great character, which he's not one that I gravitated towards much in the Justice League films, but here they give him a pretty solid emotional core and motivation where he's trying to save his mom, and in doing so, he messes up timelines. He gets mixed up with his past self. Ezra Miller actually has to play two characters here, and I think he does a really great job at doing that. On top of that, it's pretty seamless the way that they put the two Ezra Millers in the same frame together. There's some really fun time travel humor for me here where I have a lot of fun with movie trivia and knowledge. So the way that they play with that in the time travel aspect here, where it's like Eric Stoltz is actually the star of Back to the Future in this timeline, I think all of that is really smart and cracks me up. And even the way that they play this into the beginning of the DCEU with Man of Steel and bringing Zod in there, all of that really works for me. It does get hurt a little bit by the poor visual effects for sure. I'm not going to argue with anyone about that, but the fun of the Flash and the core of the emotion overpowers all of that for me, that even though this film admittedly has tons of flaws, I just am so endeared by it. I have so much fun with it. It's one of my favorite ones to revisit in the DCU as a whole, and I leave smiling every time I watch it. It's got that nostalgia factor with Michael Keaton as Batman, but it also works for the story itself. I think they did a really good job. And Muschietti, I think, did a really good job with The Flash, at least in my opinion. I think it's a ton of fun and is one of the more enjoyable films in the entire DCEU canon. Next up, we have Blue Beetle, and for me, I think Blue Beetle is a B category type movie. I do think that Blue Beetle is a good, solid story, but the thing that works the most against Blue Beetle is that Blue Beetle is so derivative of a bunch of comic book tropes and story elements that we've seen in past films like Iron Man, like Ant-Man, for example. But Blue Beetle also has a very strong family core to it, and I'm sure you've probably learned by now watching this video that when a film has a family core and family dynamics that work for me, I give a lot of grace to the movie itself, and that's how I kind of feel about Blue Beetle, where I don't think it's the most original comic book film. I don't think it's the most interesting comic book superhero character, but I really enjoyed the family aspect of the film and the way that that is the core of the story. The villains, they're pretty weak and forgettable. Even Blue Beetle himself isn't a superhero character that I gravitate that much towards. I don't think that his power set is that engaging or interesting to me, but the performances and the overall just vibe of the movie does carry a lot of that for me. And even though I do think it's a story we've seen time and time again, especially this far into the comic book boom of the genre, it's also a story that's not done terribly. It's done pretty well. So I will put Blue Beetle up into that B category. To be fair, it's not one that I watch over and over again, but I do think that it's a solid outing for the DCEU. But now we've reached the depths of the DCEU and the final entry in the DCEU with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And for me, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was kind of always in a losing position where we knew that it was going to be the last DCEU film. We also knew that it was not intended to be the last DCEU film, so it doesn't do anything to wrap up this universe. It doesn't do anything to end these stories. The universe just really does end. And for me, it kind of ends on a bit of a downer note with Aquaman Lost Kingdoms. I'm going to put this in the D category. I don't find much enjoyment in this film. I find a lot of the story elements to be very rushed. I find a lot of the performances to be very weak. Not only is Amber Heard in this film absolutely terrible, but so many other actors in this are absolutely terrible. In fact, Patrick Wilson is really the only person who carries this film for me. He just kind of has this natural charisma and enthusiastic energy throughout the entire film. Even Jason Momoa here as Aquaman feels like he's regressed in the character. He doesn't really have much more to add to the character up until this point. Black Manta coming back in here as the villain. Again, it felt very cheap to just set him up in the first film so he could be the villain in this one. I don't feel like they do a very good job establishing him as a villain in this film. The action sequences are so unmemorable and so uninteresting and engaging to me. This movie ends with a post-credit scene of Patrick Wilson's character biting into a burger with a bug that has just crawled in there and then putting a big smile on his face. And unfortunately, that's how the DCEU kind of feels like it went out. It went out on this very low point of a note where they had some pretty good entries within their canon. You can see on this tier list, I do like a number of DCEU entries. I wasn't rooting for this universe to fail, but by the time we got to Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, it was pretty evident that this universe was already 1 foot out the door when they were making this film. And the decision to make this be the final movie that the DCEU ever produced, the writings on the wall when I watched this one, they were very low in the gutter. And I don't think they were going to be coming out strong after Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So for me, this is one of the worst in the entire DCEU. It's down there in the D list, and it ends this universe on an unfortunate, dour note. But with that, we now jump on into the DCU, which James Gunn is now running and completed its first year, and started with Creature Commandos, this animated show that James Gunn created and worked on and directed a couple episodes of. And it is kind of the unofficial start to the DCU, where it's got characters that will and do continue on in the universe, but it wasn't theatrical and it was just kind of put on HBO Max. And I will put Creature Commandos in the C category. For me, this wasn't the most engaging watch, and it wasn't some of Gunn's best work. It did play kind of like Gunn's best hits. He's got the misfit group of characters, they've got the tragic backstories, and he's also got the heart of the characters for that. It felt like Gunn doing what he's kind of known to do and was kind of predictable. There was also a lot that felt kind of repetitive in Creature Commandos for me. And there's not really a character in Creature Commandos that I come out of Creature Commandos finding myself loving, finding myself having a strong connection to. And I didn't find myself eager to get back into the world of Creature Commandos. And so for me, it started off the DCEU on a fine enough note. I enjoyed the first 2 episodes quite a bit, but as it went on, I got less and less interested and engaged in the show. So it's a fine show. It's up there above Peacemaker season 1 for me, but it's behind things like Black Adam and Aquaman in the C category. But that brings us to the official start of the DCEU, especially in the theatrical format with Superman. James Gunn's Superman was my most anticipated film of the entire year. It was a lot of people's most anticipated film of the entire year to see what James Gunn was going to do, bring us into the DCU with this new Superman. And one of the things I think James Gunn did the best job with this film is establishing this character of Superman, bringing that Boy Scout goody two-shoes type character of Superman into the 21st century, updating the character while keeping him with the core essence of what we know Superman to be. I think worked very well in this film. I also liked the relationship between David Cornsweet and Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane and Clark Kent. I do think that James Gunn also populated the world with some fun characters such as Guy Gardner and Mr. Terrific, and of course Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor. But there's also a lot within Superman as a story that I do feel was a little bit overly stuffed in some ways, and it does wear its comic book roots on its sleeve. It's not ashamed to be a comic book property, and it just goes full in with all of the wackiness of multiverse and interdimensional portals and all this stuff. It just throws at you with little to no real introduction or setup for it. And in some ways that does work very well for the movie. You just hop in, you're in this world, you either run with it or you run away from it. And for me, I was running with it for the most part. I do feel like some of the story elements got a little bit messy, especially by the end of the film. And there were definitely some moments where I felt like Gunn was maybe overdoing it, or maybe was feeling a little bit spread too thin by doing Creature Commandos, Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2 all in one year. It felt like he was kind of overwhelmed a bit while making this film, but I do think that this was a solid foundation overall for the DCU. It introduced us to a great new Superman, one that I really like, and the world as a whole was a fun new comic book world to delve into. So for me, this might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to put Superman in the B category. I'm also going to put it at the front end of the B category. It's not up there with the A's or the S's, so I mean, theoretically, I like more DCEU movies more than I like the first entry of the DCU, but there's still tons of more movies and products to come from the DCU to make it in those A's and S lists. But for me, Superman, I feel pretty comfortable putting him in the B spot for now. And that's now going to bring us to Peacemaker Season 2. And full disclosure, I can't speak 100% to this season because I didn't watch this season beyond episode 2, and seeing how we already talked about Peacemaker Season 1, you guys can probably already tell that James Gunn just seemed to double down with his grotesque and abrasive, over the top, even gross sexual humor and elements into this season, where it's just something that I don't enjoy watching. It doesn't work for me. The humor here really doesn't jive with me. It's so juvenile to the point that I don't think that it's clever. I did see some sequences from more episodes later on in the season. The bird blindness stuff did not work for me. When I saw that, I didn't think it was very funny. And again, this is all subjective. I know a lot of people loved Season 2. I know a lot of people just love Peacemaker in general. And I usually love James Gunn's humor. I really enjoy it in the movies, but it feels like in the movies he's reined in a bit more. He's got executives and studio heads that were over him that maybe told him to dial it back at times, where now he's the head of DC, he's the head of the studio, and he creates all this stuff. He can do literally whatever he wants, and Peacemaker Season 2 proved he will do whatever he wants with this product. And I think that Gunn is just better when he's caged a bit more, when he does have those reins on him from people overlooking his work. And I think it brings out the best of him when he has people keeping him in check in that way. And Peacemaker Season 2 just felt like it went full Gun to the point where he had no leash, no reins on him whatsoever. And I think that that was to a detriment to this show as a whole for me. And I totally acknowledge people love this. It worked for a majority of people. This is just my list, and on my list, I'm gonna put Peacemaker Season 2 in the D category. I'm sorry. This is just not my kind of show. So it's down there in the D category. And I'm still optimistic for the DCU. I'm still on board with James Gunn as the head. But I will admit that I'm a little bit more shaky than I used to be with seeing how Creature Commandos and like Peacemaker Season 2 and even some of the elements of Superman ended up turning out. But as it is for right now, that is how I would put the DCEU and the DCU on my tier ranking list. How would you guys tier rank the DCEU and DCU, or just what are your favorite projects from each one? Comment down below, let me know. I'd love to hear what you have to say. As always, guys, don't just watch movies, talk movies. If you want more content, there's some playlists and some videos right over here that you can check out. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.